Kyiv has officially stopped considering Washington a reliable ally due to Donald Trump's positions and is increasingly shifting its focus to Europe and beyond. Ukraine has quietly changed its partnership strategy with the United States and redirected its alliance toward Europe and even the Middle East. Essentially, while everyone is debating whether the US will leave NATO or not, Ukraine has already managed to shift its partnership. And today, in a new article by The Atlantic, Professor of Strategic Studies at the University of St. Andrews, Philip O'Brien, analyzes Ukraine's sharp shift in its position toward the United States of America. And I like this article so much that I want to share it with you. Despite the reduction in American support, Ukraine, as O'Brien claims, has managed to adapt to the new conditions of war and even seize the initiative. And most importantly, Ukraine has finally let go of Trump and can now afford not to curry favor with the American president's administration at all. And if you listen to the latest rhetoric from the office of the president of Ukraine, you'll see that they have started to speak quite critically about both Trump and his policies. This shows that there are no more concerns, and it's clear that there is a new partnership and a new alliance. Let's talk about that. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and leave any comment under this episode. And if you consider the work of this channel important and necessary, you can support this channel with your donation or sponsorship on YouTube. How to do this? All the links and details are in the description of this video or via the QR code on your screens. So, today the Atlas published an article by Professor Philip O'Brien who explores how Ukraine quietly wrote Donald Trump off and reoriented its partnership and alliances. As the professor writes, for more than a year after Donald Trump returned to the White House, Ukraine, at least publicly, held out hope that it could win him over to its side. Publicly, Ukraine negotiated and even agreed to almost everything discussed in the White House, but behind the scenes something else was happening. Here is a quote from O'Brien. Donald Trump, who repeatedly showed his sympathy for Vladimir Putin, effectively halted American military aid to Ukraine. He regularly insulted the Ukrainian leadership, and in February 2025 he personally reprimanded President Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office. Nevertheless, Ukraine dutifully took part in the peace talks initiated by Trump, although from the start they were skewed in favor of encouraging Russian aggression and ultimately proved fruitless. Zelensky agreed to mineral extraction deals that supposedly promised benefits to Americans. He even generously praised Donald Trump himself. Despite growing doubts, Ukrainian leaders assumed that flattering words toward the US president would do no harm and might even help win his favor. But here's the most interesting part. All this time it was happening behind the scenes. Now Kyiv seems to have already given up hope for the United States of America. Ukraine is actively seeking new diplomatic and military partners. Well, for example, by sharing its hard-earned experience in drone warfare with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, and also by signing agreements on joint arms production with Germany, the United Kingdom, and the Scandinavian countries. But most importantly, Ukraine sent drones to strike oil export facilities in the St. Petersburg area of Russia. That's deep behind enemy lines. Ignoring, as Zelensky himself put it, signals from certain partners to refrain from attacks on Russian energy infrastructure. Later, the head of the office of the president of Ukraine, Kirilo Budanov, confirmed that yes, Washington had been asking them to refrain from strikes all this time. But now Ukraine can afford not to listen to these calls. And now, using phrases that until recently seemed unthinkable, Zelensky made it clear that he no longer considers the United States of America a reliable ally. And what's even more remarkable, he believes that all of Europe should start moving away from transatlantic dependence, striving to prevent further increases in energy prices amid American dependence. During the Israeli war against Iran, the Trump administration, as you know, eased sanctions on Russian oil producers and sellers. And in an interview with Italian radio last week, Zelensky criticized this decision. Here is his quote. In my opinion, Russia outplayed the Americans again. They outplayed the President of the United States himself. And importantly, Zelensky himself shared the English version of his comments about Trump on Twitter in order to reach an even larger audience. Soon after that, Zelensky stated that if the US really plans to leave NATO, as Trump has repeatedly threatened, European democracies will need a completely new security architecture. And according to him, in order to protect themselves from Russia without American help, the European Union will need the capabilities of countries like Norway, the United Kingdom, Turkey, and Ukraine. In this way, Zelensky now stands in sharp contrast to European leaders who for the past 15 months have been desperately pretending that the US is still committed to its traditional allies. In this process, some of them have actually humiliated themselves, like NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who called Donald Trump daddy, in case you forgot. Well, later, Rutte, who is Dutch by origin, explained it as a language issue. He said he didn't say daddy, he called him something else, but that's how everyone took it. No one wanted to admit that Trump's return has made the US a threat to European security. Here's another quote from O'Brien. Ukraine's willingness to speak openly has been the result of a combination of several factors. The US even reduced the modest amounts of weapons they were still selling to Ukraine, aiming to preserve resources for their own war against Iran. Although Trump occasionally spoke about the possibility of imposing tough sanctions against Russia, probably to appease the pro-Ukrainian wing of his party, lately he doesn't even bother with such gestures. But the most demoralizing thing for Ukrainians was that the Trump administration regularly pressured Kyiv, demanding that they cede territory and, importantly, the population of Donbass, to Putin as part of a peace agreement. These circumstances prompted Zelensky and other Ukrainian leaders to openly speak about the increasingly close relationship between the US and Putin, and to warn other European countries about the danger as Ukraine's public stance changes against the backdrop of some improvement in its military situation. Well, at least compared to the difficulties of last year, things have gotten a little better. To a large extent relying on its own drone industry and internal military organization, Ukrainian forces have regained the initiative in many areas. And in recent months, according to available data, Ukrainians have been inflicting more losses on Russia than it can replenish and are reclaiming more territory than Russia is capturing. On the front line, Ukraine has strengthened and expanded the so-called drone wall, which restricts the movement of Russian troops. Earlier this week, Kyiv announced that it had managed to capture a Russian position and capture several soldiers without putting a single Ukrainian fighter at risk, using exclusively unmanned aerial and ground systems. That is, they managed to take the position and even capture the unwashed Russians using only robotic systems. At the same time, Ukrainians have become more confident in striking with drones at medium and long distances far beyond the front line, as demonstrated by the attack near St. Petersburg, specifically Ust-Luga and Primorsk. Finally, Ukraine continues to effectively block Russia's naval presence in the Black Sea. Even ships at the most secure bases in Russia can no longer be considered out of reach for Ukrainian strikes. For the past 15 months, American officials and many Western analysts have been focused on the issue of Ukraine's weakness. Last year, Trump infamously claimed that the Ukrainians have no cards. However, Ukraine's ability to adapt even without American assistance has turned out to be simply astonishing. And today, Ukraine is one of the world leaders in the development and production of drones. And according to reports, they plan to produce up to 7 million military drones in 2026. Moreover, the Secretary of the Army, Dan Driscoll, recently stated directly that yes, the American Army is learning a great deal from the armed forces of Ukraine in terms of conducting modern warfare. Ukrainians would certainly prefer to see the US on their side, not on Russia's side. From 2022 to 2024, Washington provided Ukraine with more military aid than any other country in the world. Although a significant portion of this aid arrived with delays, and it was often accompanied by simply annoying restrictions, it still played a crucial role in Ukraine's survival during the first years of the war. However, today Ukrainians do not believe that the loss of American support will inevitably lead to some kind of defeat. As O'Brien writes, Ukrainians see that they are able to sustain their military efforts with their own resources and the help of European partners, even despite the withdrawal of the US. At one time, losing the United States as an ally could have meant disaster for Ukraine. Now that's no longer the case. O'Brien concludes his article. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like the video. Subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link is in the description of this video. And if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, I would really appreciate it. You can do this through donations, YouTube sponsorship, or a paid subscription, for example, on the Patreon platform. All the links and details are in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone. To be continued.